Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be reading 3 tips to become a better software engineer. So last week, I read and reacted to 10 lessons learned from 15 years working as a software engineer. A lot of these lessons resonated with my own experience, but I felt several could be distilled to more general advice that would work more universally across teams, companies, and experience level. In this post, I'll dive into the 3 tips I most often give to software engineers to improve their effectiveness. Lessons from a career in software engineering. If I could only share 3 lessons from my career, I think they would be the following. Focus on impact, simple scalable systems, and be positive. Focus on impact. My first piece of advice to anyone, whether a software engineer or otherwise, is to focus on impact. At the end of the day, we are doing something to produce value. What that value is depends on our goals, values, and the state of the world. And crucially, what we are not necessarily doing is building software. That's where we're going with this. By focusing on impact, we put the why of what we're doing first. Understanding why, or as Simon Sinek says, start with why, we better understand the value of what we're doing, which then allows all following actions to be more aligned with that value stream and thus effective. There are infinite things we can do, but most of them are not very valuable. Focusing on impact ensures that we better understand why we're doing something so we can better filter our actions to only those that are most valuable. Yeah, and I think this is really the most important thing that people need to understand, and also the most common way in which I see engineers, yes, but also people in general doing like not effective things, is because they don't really understand the core value behind the actions they're doing, and therefore they'll do actions that either don't help you get towards the value, or in some cases actually hurt and go like the opposite way. And there's a few ways I think about this is like, okay, what are we trying to approach? And you can think of like the rules of thumb of like, you got to do the 80-20 of things. You can't scale yourself with more effort. You can only scale with better prioritization. But in order to find what those 80-20 things are, you actually need to understand what the problem is you're trying to solve. Why are you doing this? And then you can work backwards to figure out what actions are the least amount of cost getting you the most of the way there. And if you don't understand why, you can't actually do that. So you could try just a random assortment of 20%, but it's likely those 20% will be in the area of things that don't actually do anything for you. And then the worst way that I've seen this is like, most things you'll do random actions and they just won't be helpful, but in some cases they'll actually be hurtful. And that's like, you're trying to go in some direction, but you don't understand what that direction is because you don't understand the why of what you're doing. You can often run like very fast, put a lot of effort in the wrong direction, and now you're actually further from your goal than you were to start with. And so here's an example, and I see this happen a lot with engineers. Again, like I'm saying, is like, but you're never paid to run a website. Like as software engineers, you're paid kind of, or when you're hired, you have this job description of everything you're going to be owning and building and stuff like that. But that's actually not true. That's not what you're getting paid for. That's like your role for the most part, but that's not why you're getting paid. What you're doing is you're getting paid to keep the value train running that happens to work on that piece of software today. So an example is if you have a marketing website that, your team supports or something, you're actually not getting paid to just like support the marketing website. What you're actually getting paid to do is to make it so that customers can keep finding your product and learning about it and eventually hopefully buying it from your company, because that's the value stream. That's why this website exists in the first place. Another example is like if you have a web app, your goal again is not to build the web app, not to add features, not to do buttons or whatever. The goal of that web app is actually to make it so that customers keep getting value from your app and so that they keep paying the company for it. That's actually what your job is, and your role just happens to be that currently a web app supports that. And this probably seems really trivial, but like I seriously see this go wrong so much, and this is what leads to the build trap. This is what leads to, working on year-long plans from project managers, and then everything is to spec, but it's actually not useful. So many problems start with this. So, and the best solution I have is to really just like focus on the impact of what you're doing so that you don't waste everybody's time, and including your own. Okay, simple, scalable systems. My motto, kind of. My second piece of advice is to focus on simple, scalable systems for achieving your goals. The idea is that fast quality iterations will allow us to achieve the impact we seek much faster and more effectively over time than either working with no systems or working with heavy process. Determining what the right balance is for your team or org is a constant process. Balance is a verb. There is no right answer, and the answer will likely change over time, but typically it's going to be more systematic than no systems and less systematic than do the exact same thing every single time. The best way I found for finding this balance is experimentation. If you see the same problem several times, try to fix it with a simple scalable system. My rule of thumb is typically if something's going wrong wrong like 3-ish times, then it might be worth trying to resolve. Something lightweight, but should solve it systematically. If it still isn't fixing it, try something more robust. If it feels like overkill, try something lighter. Yeah, and I wish there was like, better, more specific advice to give, but the truth is like it always depends, and there's always trade-offs. And so I really think that what you're aiming for is balance. Does this feel effective? If it doesn't, why is that? What is something we could try to make it more effective? And you kind of like zoom in on the balance there. And I do think it really is important to call out this idea that the answer will change over time, because a lot of times when we find something that a company is doing, they'll throw it back to tradition. Like that's just the way we've always done. And there'll often be a lot of pushback because there is usually a reason why it turned into that over time. And so you need to respect that there probably was a reason why it started, but also realize that just because there was a reason then, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the correct reason now. Yeah. And so there's a few examples of like simple scalable systems that I found useful across my career in many different kind of scenarios. But I think it's important to also call out that each of these things took a slightly different form in each different company, because, and even each different team and even each different year, it changed a little bit based on what we were doing and what the specifics were. So I would encourage you to try these things, but then also look out for other little problems or inefficiencies you see, and think about what is the simplest scalable system for solving this thing, so that you can do these really quick, cheap experiments, try and make it more effective. But if it fails, you didn't pay, that much cost. So it's okay. It's not a big deal. So the first thing is to provide a simple hypothesis for every code change and project. Why are we doing this? Why do we think it's important? And what is your actual plan to solve this? And the big thing for this is that it really forces you to focus on why and to write it down, so that you can, get it out of your brain, make sure it makes sense, but also so others can take a look at it and see if it makes sense there. Just having a simple hypothesis, which is usually like, what's the context? What's the problem? What's the impact of this thing? And what is your solution to solve it? And potentially other solutions you thought about but decided were not as good. That is a very simple, low-cost way of just making sure you're on the same page as everyone else. And even with just that much information, it's very easy for someone to come in and review and say, yes, this makes sense, or no, I think you missed something, and save you a lot of time down the road. The next one is code reviews, and particularly code reviews with a bias for 1, improving to unblock, and 2, non-blocking nits, which are two sides of a similar thing, so that you always give feedback, but you don't block on it if it's not serious. So I think most people are on board with code reviews these days, but I really don't think you should have a system where you don't do code review. And I think code review doesn't have to be like this really heavyweight, like everything needs to be 100% perfect, because we'll never achieve perfect. It just needs to be good enough. It needs to be like, yeah, this is decent for now. I don't see any like big problems with this. And I can't think of a better way to solve it. If that's correct, then it should just be good. But you shouldn't skip code review, because you definitely don't want bad code going into your system, because if there's trash in your system, then your system's really only as good as like the weakest link. So it's just going to cause problems down the road. So might as well just solve it now. But I think you shouldn't block on every little thing. Like, some spelling mistakes, yes, you should, get people to change, but you shouldn't block on it. Like, you shouldn't necessarily do a request for changes. This is one of those things that you should say, hey, Nit, fix the spelling or whatever, but I'm actually just going to accept this because I trust you, that you're going to fix this thing and I don't need to review it again. And then you can just go ahead and ship. Little things like that makes code review go way faster while still getting a majority of the impact of code reviews. Okay, the next thing is providing agendas for every meeting. Seriously, if you don't have an agenda, it's unlikely to be useful in a meeting. Yeah, this is one I talk about so much, and it's really feels like it's just not even related to being a software engineer, just really related to being like dealing with humans. And I really believe that every meeting I've seen that doesn't have an agenda is not very effective. And I've now seen it on both sides. Not effective because it goes way too long and you can't talk about some things, or you're off track, and so it's just a waste of time. And I've now actually seen it on the other side too, where if you don't have an agenda, meetings will be cut prematurely without talking about the most important things that this group of people was supposed to talk about. And so I think an agenda is just a great way, super lightweight, simple scalable system to get people on the same page of what we're going to talk about, what's the order, let you plan ahead, make sure everyone's prepared, and then get to those things so that you've actually made, effective use of this time of all these people. I have a template in here for the agendas I use for meetings. It's very simple, and it's worked for me across like basically every team I've been on. So I'd really recommend using something like that. It doesn't have to be complicated. It just really needs to be written down. Leave everything better than you find it. If you're looking at changing code and something is confusing, consider taking an extra extra 10% of your project time to clean it up while you're there. Yeah, I think this is important, and it kind of is a little bit counterintuitive because it goes against some of these things, but it's kind of closer to be positive, which we'll talk about in a minute. But a lot of people ask, like, when I say focus on impact and I say like most backlog things don't matter, most features and bug fixes we'll just never get to, like, how does that work? Like, how can our system get better if we have an unlimited backlog of things that need to be fixed? And I think there's a balance you can find of fixing the things that are important without the whole system like just becoming unusable and unstable. And the balance that I found that works the best is to never do like a tech debt sprint. Like a tech debt sprint is just stupid. A backlog sprint is just stupid because what you're basically saying is like, let's have a week where we just do useless things that were never important enough for us to do before. I don't think that's what you should be doing. What you should be doing is basically saying, as we're building projects, as we're going through of achieving our impact, of achieving the why of why our services exist, to consider, is there anything we can do while we're here to help fix something? And so the way that I like to refactor is like, as you're going, if you're going to touch some functions in software, you're going to have to understand that a little bit. So you're going to have to read through it, understand what it's doing, and think about like, hey, it's a little bit out of scope for me to refactor this whole thing because I'm just building a new feature on this. But is there something I could do that both improves this feature and actually helps me build my feature on top of it? And that way, as you go, everything you touch gets a little bit better. And that is a simple scalable system for improving everything as you go without getting in the way of value delivery. And actually over time, this increases your value delivery because the next time you got to touch it, it's better. The whole system gets a little bit 1% better, but you haven't gone out of your way and like added 2 times more cost to your project. Usually it's just like an extra 1 to 10%. So that's what I found is really helpful at scale, and how you kind of do this refactoring while still delivering value, both directly and indirectly. And the metaphor for this I always think about is like, if you go hiking somewhere, like you're probably not going to like volunteer for the Forest Service and like be their, trash person 24/7. But what you can do is take a bag with you as you go hiking and just pick up trash as you're going, because you're already there. It takes you like no extra effort, and then you can just throw it in the trash later. And now if, you just do it when you go hiking, and then maybe let's say one person does that every week, now this trail is going to be pretty clean because you're just leaving it a little bit better than you found it for basically no extra cost because you're already there. Okay, and this is related to my third point, which is just to be positive. So I believe nothing really matters, thus you might as well be happy. Read positive. And I can wax poetic here in one of my reflections. You don't like working with your jerk coworker, so do not be the jerk coworker to someone else. In my opinion, you should always strive to be not negative. You don't need to and probably shouldn't be a selfless altruist giving all your efforts away for free, but you also shouldn't be doing bad things. Adam Grant dubs this balance being otherish in his book Give and Take. You do your main thing, focusing on impact, and give positively where it makes sense. Now, it's important that you must focus on yourself first before helping others, because if you are not doing your main thing, taking care of yourself and your duties, then you aren't in a good position to help others with theirs. Commonly used parallels to this include put on your mask before you help others with theirs, like on an airplane, and you cannot fill another's cup if your cup is empty. But at the same time, you can't only focus on your own duties, as that will only get you so far. It may seem like spending time, effort, resources to help others will hamper your own interests, your career, projects, or team, but actually if you view every project, team, and company as an ecosystem, this free giving, where its impact to cost ratio is attractive, is extremely impactful for elevating your own station, often more than selfish actions would be. Similar to a rising tide lifts all ships. A better metaphor for us software engineers is probably tech debt in a software system. If we always focus on the short-term wins, we intuitively know that tech debt will accumulate. The best way to accomplish X short-term is rarely the best way to do so long-term, as we take more shortcuts that make future changes harder. Counterintuitively, the best way to get wins long-term is actually to find the balance between the business-focused win short-term, so this is like the selfish side of things, and long-term infra that also allows it to happen with less cost. And so this is kind of the selfless kinds of things. The business-focused wins can't be the only thing we do, as eventually the wins will grind to a halt as the system is hard to change, or perhaps just isn't cooperating with each other. So, works both in software, but also in kind of like organizational sides of things. The infra wins also can't be the only thing we do, as we're here to run a business, and if the business doesn't get wins, it doesn't get money, and now we're all out of a job. So the optimal balance is actually the otherish approach, being both pragmatic and positive. So delivering those wins, also making the ecosystem better as we go. Build the business wins aggressively, and when the impact to cost ratio makes sense for improvements to the system, help given to others, do that. And this is basically what I was talking about earlier in this example, where it's like you basically just want to leave everything better than you found it. Like, I'm not saying that you should go full-time on mentorship and spend, an extra 20 hours a week just just mentoring people. Like mentorship's good, sure, but like that's kind of a waste of time because you're spending 20 of your hours doing this, so you're going to burn out. Like you're not taking care of yourself. A better way is to think about like, you know, as we're talking about like you're on the trail and you're picking up trash while you're there. Like, so ways to be positive include, you know, refactoring the code as you go, because that actually both improves the ecosystem, but also improves your ability to build new features. So that is being otherish. Another example is like writing some documentation that maybe you're getting a lot of questions about from your team. You're getting a lot of questions about from newer junior engineers or newer engineers to the company. Like that is also a way to be positive and has a really high impact cost ratio because it saves you and your team time, but it also helps a bunch more people for lower cost than it would for you to answer all their questions individually. These are all ways to be positive in this kind of like otherish idea, which means that you're usually getting a lot of impact for the cost because you have high leverage in whatever it is you're doing. And because you're kind of like building the greater ecosystem, making it more effective, that often leads to a lot of dividends to make your own area more effective because everything around it is more effective that you couldn't do if you were only focused on just your area. Next, these 3 principles have got me pretty far in my own career. And let me know if you have your own best pieces of advice for other software engineers or disagree with these or whatever. I would love to discuss in the comments. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.